Hi, today I'm going to talk about the over-relaxed tissue state, or the damp flowing state, possibly correlating with damp cold as opposed to damp heat. And this is usually corrected using astringent herbs. So in the over-relaxed state, a patient's tissues lack tone. The organs are slack, dilated, prolapsed, or can be. There is free secretion and discharge. The tissues are unable to hold on to fluids. The symptoms and signs include excessive secretion, as we've suggested, thin, clear or white discharge, excessive sweating, excessive salivation, chronic diarrhea, heavy menstrual bleeding, excessive urination. The skin is pale and clammy. Veins are pale blue as opposed to vivid blue or purpley blue, so paler than that. The immunity is poor, so there's frequent upper respiratory tract infections, chronically swollen lymph nodes, tonsils and adenoids. And there may be anemia, trace mineral deficiencies, a leaky gut syndrome where the integrity of the gut wall is compromised, so that substances get into the deeper layers of the gut and absorbed into the lymph and the bloodstream, which normally shouldn't. Associated medical conditions that you could see elements of the over-relaxed state in would be varicose veins and hemorrhoids, chronic rhinitis, uterine or bladder prolapse, hernias, anything like that where there's over-relaxation of the tissues. Right heart failure would be another example where a consequence of that is drowning in your own fluids. The lungs become filled with fluid. Irritable bowel syndrome, certain kinds of that where there's like just really sort of runny, watery stools a lot of the time. Osteoporosis can be part of an over-relaxed state. And over-relaxation is possibly seldom primary. It usually results from something else. So it could result from atrophy of the tissues, where the tissues have lost their integrity, so they're unable to hold on to fluids. Strangely enough, over-relaxation of the tissues can then lead to tension. It's like the body is attempting to retain what fluids are remaining. It's kind of like bolting the door after the horse is bolted, sort of thing. And this can result in high blood pressure. So we usually correct this with astringent herbs, and as a category it covers not just astringent tasting herbs but other herbs that have an astringent-like effect. But the primary taste is astringent, which, as you know, has a kind of drying effect on the mouth. Astringents contract tissue at a local level, so particularly the mucous membranes. Esoterically, they provide a grounding effect and a sense of balance. They tend to be, well, one category would be tannin-rich remedies. Tannins are large polyphenolic compounds, and the phenol groups have a strong affinity for proteins. So they're able to latch on proteins and pull tissue structures together by forming molecular bridges. So if you have a mucous membrane that's all kind of floppy and all the cells are hanging out, then you can sort of astringe that, pull it together a bit. And it has been shown that astringent herbs do firm up those cell adhesion molecules in between cells to present a more tight structure of the mucous membrane against the mucosal lumen. Astringent herbs as a category also contain some non-tannin remedies, which nevertheless have a binding, contracting action. So a good example would be Aesculus hippocastanum, horse chestnut with its saponins, and Equisetum arvense with silica. We'll go into the some astringent remedies in more detail now, starting with oak bark, Quercus robur. Here we see this majestic tree. Its primary quality is astringent. It's classed as a jovial herb in that it's ruled by Jupiter. This means that this kind of ties in with it being quite large, expensive and authoritative, and we use the bark of oak usually. Principal actions, well, astringent but also antiseptic and anti-inflammatory. So a lot of these phenolic compounds have quite a strong antiseptic effect. So applicable in diarrhea, dysentery, stomach ulcers, but also internal bleeding and hemorrhagia. So hemorrhage from anywhere. Topically, it can be used to reduce inflammation and improve laxity, whether it's in the throat, in the vagina, hemorrhoids, or externally on the skin for varicose ulcers. Constituents: 10 to 20% dry weight of tannins. So catechins, epicatechin and epigallocatechin, here are the structures. Also contains beta-glycosides, quercitrin. Dosage fairly standard, maybe up to 2 mils per dose, so that would work out about 40 mils a week. No contraindications as such, but be cautious where there's constipation, you suspect iron deficiency, anemia, and where there's malnutrition, because astringent in the gut can make all of these things worse. Another astringent particular favourite of mine, Polygonum bistorta, partly because I seem to be able to grow it like anything, so I've got a front yard full of this stuff. And we use the rootstock. It's also cold and dry and astringent, but it has a kind of starchy, mealy quality as well, slightly aromatic. But saturnine, where Quercus is jovial, so it's probably colder and dry, more I don't know. Principal actions. Well, we've got the actions down the left-hand side here: astringent and anticatarrhal demulcent externally, so it's got that double thing going where it's astringent but also soothing. Anti-inflammatory and alterative, appreciably alterative, and bistort pudding from the leaves is made in the spring traditionally as a spring cleansing food, along with nettles. It's antitoxic, so it's applicable in diarrhea, especially with children. It's a very mild remedy. It's useful for children. In mucus colitis, where you've got inflammation of the colon that's producing an awful lot of mucus, and again with a very slippery mucus type of irritable bowel syndrome. Here's a very rough drawing of the rootstock, and this is why it's called bistorta, because it's twice twisty. This is absolutely characteristic of the plant. Rich in tannins and starch, but also gums, so that gives you the aromatic. And there's no known cautions. Pretty standard dosage of Polygonum bistorta. Aesculus hippocastanum, horse chestnut. Here's the cheggies or conkers that we use, and this is specifically applied for where there's inflammation and congestion. A dull aching pain with fullness, these are the specific indications. It's a venous tonic. It can be used for chronic venous insufficiency, and indeed Pittler and Ernst did a review of the trials that have been done with horse chestnut seed extract, and the general conclusion was that using that standardized extract was at least as good as applying compression bandages in alleviating chronic venous insufficiency, or CVI. And if anyone's ever used a compression bandage, then they'd be quite happy to take herbal pills instead of using them. Aesculus can decrease both lymphatic and inflammatory edema, and it's a capillary tonic. So principal constituents: saponins 3 to 6% by dry weights. Aeskin is a sort of generic term for a range of saponins that you find in Aesculus, and they're all along this line in terms of the molecular structure, and each slightly different species will have a different variable group on this part of the molecule. Also contains lipids and sterols. So dosage, a slightly lower dosage, 15 mils tops. If you have too much, then you can get digestive upsets. It can be quite excoriating for the gut. And avoid it externally if there's broken skin or ulcers, because remember that saponins can be hemolytic. Nevertheless, there's a very low risk of toxicity from Aesculus if used properly. Another favourite mine, Rus aromatica, sweet sumac. It comes as these berries, and it's astringent but also sour. Culpeper puts it cold and dry in the 2nd degree, so quite a cooling herb, this one. And you use the dried berries, or sometimes you can use the bark. And this is used as a condiment in the Middle East. Principal actions: first of all, as a tonic diuretic, so it's very good in bedwetting, enuresis, in nephritis, where there's inflammation of the nephrons. So this is one of those herbs that you can use to some extent in kidney inflammation. Traditionally used for gonorrhea, although if you suspect a case of gonorrhea, of course you have to report it and refer. Good for prostatitis and diabetes insipidus, which is intense diuresis caused by an upset of the pituitary gland. So it's called insipidus because the urine tastes insipid, as opposed to mellitus, where it tastes of honey because of the sugar. So there's no sugar lost in this kind of diabetes, but still considerable fluids. So that kind of over-relaxed state where you're just losing loads of urine. More actions: general astringent, so useful for heavy periods around the menopause, in diarrhea and dysentery, aphthous ulcers. So these are suppurative ulcers of the gums, stomatitis, inflammation of the mouth generally, and it's also appreciably hypoglycemic. Matthew Wood has it applied for weak-willed, flaccid people with low resistance. So, like me, if I'm presented with a bar of chocolate, maybe. So maybe I should be taking sweet sumac to resist. I don't know. Tonic to the mucous membranes when they are over-relaxed, catarrhal, ulcerated. And Menzies Trowel has it as a specific where the tongue is pale and trembly. There's trembling lower limbs, and there's a small feeble pulse, and the patient has a lot of lassitude, so it's quite a good tonic to help people pull themselves together. Interesting that earlier I'd found an indication for nephritis, but it's also in literature contraindicated in active inflammation of the kidney, so make of that what you will. So your usual gallic acid and tannins, but also essential oils and resins, and a pretty standard dosage. Finally, agrimony, which is a mild astringent, but also restoring and uplifting and calming. So usual anti-hemorrhagic, anti-inflammatory, anti-diarrheal, and can be used for healing wounds. Has a significant hepatic effect, but we also use it as a relaxant, where outward expression is at odds with internal emotional turmoil.